English future perfect tense. This tense expresses an action that will be completed at some time in the future. The future perfect tense is formed with the future tense of the auxiliary to have plus the past participle of the main verb. Here are some examples. We can say, I will have greeting, or we can use the contraction, I'll be greeting, you'll be greeted, and so on. Regarding the uses, this tense is used to express future completion. For example, they will have bought the house before the children finish the school. In this sentence, we are using two tenses. In the first clause, a future perfect tense, and in the second clause, a present tense. In the second clause, the present tense is used in English, even though the verb refers to an action in the future. Spanish future perfect tense. The future perfect tense is formed with the future tense of the auxiliary verb haber plus the past participle of the main verb. Here we have some examples of the use of Spanish future perfect tense with the verbs participar, comer, and vivir. Regarding the uses, the future perfect tense in Spanish is used to express future completion, as in English, and to express surprise. For example, ¿Cómo lo habrá visto Santiago? And its translation into English, how can Santiago have seen it?
Future perfect progressive tense in English. This tense expresses an action or a state that will be continued and then completed in the future. It is formed with the future perfect tense of the auxiliary to be, plus the present participle of the main verb. Here we have some examples in singular and plural. These examples are used to emphasize the duration of an action whose beginning point is not specified, but whose completion, at least provisionally, will be in the future. Future perfect progressive tense in Spanish. It is formed with the future tense of haber, plus the past participle of estar, and the present participle of the main verb. It emphasizes the long duration of an action whose beginning is not specified, but whose probable completion will be in the future. It is often used to indicate possibility. For example, in singular we have habré estado corriendo, habrás estado corriendo, habrá estado corriendo. In plural we have habremos estado corriendo, habréis estado corriendo, habrán estado corriendo.
Now let's see the conditional perfect in English. Forms. To form the conditional perfect in English, we use the conditional tense of to have plus the past participle of the main verb. For example, as you can see here, in the first person of singular, we write I would have eaten. In this case, the conditional tense of to have is would have, and we add the past participle of the verb eat, that is eaten. Okay, now regarding the uses of the conditional perfect in English, this tense is used primarily in the result clauses of type 3 conditional sentences. For example, you would have passed your exam if you had worked harder. As you can see here, the conditional perfect, that is would have passed, shows the result of the sentence. By other hand, we have the past perfect, that is had worked. In this case, this part functions as the condition of the sentence. Finally, something that we have to take into account when use conditional perfect is that the apostrophe D in English can be a contraction of both had and would. For example, in this sentence we have, if he had said he needed, I would have given it to him. As we can see, we contract the had said with the apostrophe D, and in the same way we contract the would have with the apostrophe D.
Now I'm going to continue talking about the conditional perfect tense in Spanish.
We form the conditional perfect tense by using the auxiliary verb haber plus the past participle. We need to inflect the verb haber. Habría, habrías, habría, habríamos, habríais, and habrían. The conditional perfect tense is used as in English, the third conditional. Ella habría vivido en Francia si ella hubiera aceptado el trabajo de diseñadora de moda. We need to use would plus the auxiliary verb have plus the past participle. And in the if clause, we need to use the auxiliary verb had plus the past participle of the verb. There are three types of conditional sentence in Spanish. Si está listo, iremos al cine. We use in the if clause present and in the result clause future. Si estuviera listo, iríamos al cine. In the if clause, the imperfect subjunctive, and in the result clause, the conditional. And finally, si hubiera estado listo, habríamos ido al cine. In the if clause, the pluperfect subjunctive, and then a conditional perfect.
Now I am going to explain you the conditional perfect progressive tense. Let's talk about the form. In English, this tense is formed with the conditional perfect tense of the auxiliary to be, plus the present participle of the main verb. In Spanish, this tense is formed with the conditional of the verb haber, plus the past participle of estar, and the present participle of the main verb. Regarding to the use, the conditional perfect progressive is used the same way as the conditional perfect, with the additional concept of duration. Now, I am going to provide you with some examples in order to understand this topic better. The first English example is, if the weather had been better, I'd have been sitting in the garden when he arrived. The second English example is, if I had had a ball, I would have been playing football. Then we have an Spanish example. Si hubiera sabido que iba a reprobar la materia, no habría estado jugando todo el tiempo. The last Spanish example is, no habría estado durmiendo si hubiera sabido que viniste a visitarnos.
Passive voice in English. The definition of the passive voice is used when we want to emphasize the action, the verb, and the object of the sentences written them subject. The example, the active voice, Anna wrote a letter. Anna is subject, wrote is active verb, a letter is direct object, and the example, the passive voice is a letter was written by Anna. A letter is subject, was writing is passive voice, by Anna is adjective. The forms. The passive voice is formed with to be or to get plus the past participle of the main verb. Only transitive verbs, ones that have a direct object, can be made passive. For example, present, past, future, and conditional. The present active, Alex catches the racket. The passive, the racket is caught by Alex. The past active, the men read the comic books. The passive, the comic books was read by the men. The future active, Mr. Perez will leave the discussion. The passive, the discussion will be led Mr. Perez. And conditional active, John could write a book, and passive, a book could be written by John. Remember, all the perfect and progressive tense of the past voices and formed in the same way. Some forms can be very long and are seldom used.
The passive voice in Spanish is formed with the verb ser, and sometimes we use also the verb estar. After that, we add the past participle of the main verb that is acting like an adjective. In this case, this is agree in gender and number with the subject. Well, it's very important to take into account two mainly words that are usually included in the passive voice sentences. So, for example, the first word is por, in which we can analyze the following example. La comida fue traída por tu padre. In this case, we use the word por. The second sentence is related to when we use the word de. In this case, we can read the sentence that is: Este estudiante reconocido de toda su clase. However, there is a way in which we use passive voice in Spanish. We use passive voice when the agent is not known or when the result is more important than the action. For example, los libros están rotos. The another example is La iglesia fue construida en 1990. In that case, it represents that a result that is more important than the action. Additionally, there are some ways to avoid the passive voice. The first one is turn the sentence around. In this case, we can say that, for example, el proyecto fue desarrollado por la clase. In that case, this sentence is not used. So instead of this sentence, we can use la clase desarrolló un proyecto. According to the second way, is when we use an impersonal construction. For example, aquí las tareas fueron guiadas. Instead of this sentence, we can use seguían tareas. And the last way is use the reflexive. In this case, we can't say el mes pasado los libros eran promocionados a mitad de precio. Instead of this sentence, we can say el mes pasado los libros se promocionaban a mitad de precio. So